We are pouring tea.
Because we
Beautiful.
just had a front porch visit and we froze our asses.
It is so cold out.
It's deceptively cold. That sun
Yeah.
looked warm. Should we get going? I'm so curious about this. I've been thinking about it a lot. I'm really excited to learn more about this because my own memories
You
of
were a baby.
I was a really young child, but I actually have very strong memories of this play. I must have been 7 or 8 years old
Mm.
when it was being rehearsed. And I think I must have been babysat in rehearsals when I was listening to the amazing production, the audio. Whole sections of it, I was able to talk like verbatim, were just coming out of my mouth. And I thought, wow, this is one of the darkest plays
Yeah.
to sit a child in. What has this done to my psyche?
Very, very depressing.
Very depressing. But I think it's just a fabulous, bold choice to have scheduled it. I would love to know who found it. Did you manage to see it in French in Montreal and then turn it round that quickly? What's the story of how it was discovered?
I have seen it in French, and Bill knew nothing about it, or no one knew anything about Tremblay.
So he'd only done really one public perform, like he'd done Bonjour La, which had been a few years before, I think, and then
No,
no,
that came later.
that came later. And so you saw the production, I guess, in April of 71 in Montreal, that Brassard.
Yeah, actually, I saw it in Sherbrooke.
Oh, interesting. And what made you think that you should like bring Bill's attention to it? Were you thinking of it for your own
It
theater?
was very interesting because he came to me looking for plays from Quebec. He was starting the Tarragon then.
So even from the beginning of Tarragon, he had this somehow on his radar that he was curious about the plays in Quebec.
Mhm.
Only Bill. The other theaters were looking for plays from Quebec.
I wonder, is that, do you think because Bill was born in Quebec and he had that historical
I think
relationship?
so. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was
As,
always a huge part of, yes, Anne?
as far as I remember, Bill was very, very much in love with Quebec, with the people. He always tried to say a few words in French and wished he could do better, but he was very, very genuinely and deeply attracted to the
Yeah.
culture of Quebec.
Yeah.
And in those days, Michel Tremblay was considered as absolutely as an enfant terrible.
Mm.
Right? A lot of people despised the kind of language that he used to create his plays, and they would say, "Oh, c'est pas comme nous, on parle pas comme ça," and so there was an aura of scandal around him and his work.
And it was even more scandalous in for English Canada as
Yeah.
well, I imagine.
The language was very raw.
Yeah, there's a couple of words here that I think even get people's heart rates up even
Even
today.
now,
What and why this play? Why this play and bring this one in particular?
because it was the only play by Tremblay that was doable at Tarragon. Up until then, he had only written Les Berceurs, which is 15 women, and a couple of one-man shows.
Mhm.
I see. So I confused Bonjour la and La Belle Sœur. It's my first letter problem. So
Mm.
so of course that has all the women and the food tickets and the meal but this one, four people, small cast, we can do it. I'm I'm interested in the music piece of it too because am I right in thinking I remember my dad talking about the sonata structure and it being like a string quartet. Do you remember about that? Can you tell me more about that?
Michel wrote this play thinking of Brahms' quartet.
Ah.
And there are 4 voices, and they are simultaneous.
Fascinating.
Tremblay always took inspiration from a specific piece of music. For each play.
And were you thinking of that when you started working on the translation?
No, we couldn't think of that.
You simply had to translate. I'd love to know a little bit more about that relationship and how you sat to translate something together.
Well, it was very simple. I was a French connection, and Bill knew about dramaturgy and dialogue. Between the 2 of us, we could work together. At first, I thought the play was too difficult to put into English because of the language.
In what way?
Because it was written in Quebecois, and Bill insisted he was right, that a good story will always work.
And the fact that you could have set it somewhere in Ontario, but you've kept it very much in Montreal. Was that a clear decision at the time?
Yeah. I insisted that it had to take place in Montreal because it made no sense anywhere else.
And so the rhythm of the language still feels quite French to me, and I think it's really brought out in the audible version that Tarragon's done this year, because you can hear the Montreal actors and the rhythms that they have. How was that managed by the original cast at Tarragon? Because I don't know how much experience they would have had with even that Quebec accent.
Very little, but I think they understood the characters, and language is secondary. The most important thing is the characters and the story they have to tell.
It was a Patsy Hamilton. Yeah, I remember that very, very well.
And George Spartacus.
Yes, they were phenomenal, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fury of George Spartacus and the fury of Pat Hamilton. I remember really responding to that visceral anger, and the click, 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 click of even the needles in the knitting was angry. Do you remember that? The sounds, the soundscape, the beer glasses, the sounds seem so important to the storytelling.
It was a real event.
How wonderful.
I have to say something about the play. I'd heard it so many times, and listening to it, I was amazed at how musical it is. You know, even though I knew the play so well, I was amazed. The quality of the writing and the quality of the translation as well. It has not aged at all.
I tell me more about the quality of the translation, because many people have translated Tremblay into many, many languages. What makes this translation so good? Anne?
I think it is only good because it is very tight. It is close to the original.
Very close, yeah.
So you kept the word count the same?
Yeah.
That must have been hard.
It was very difficult.
Okay.
It took us a good 6 months to translate.
I was really impressed by the quick turnaround when you think about how long it takes now for a translator or a playwright to have that translation commissioned before it hits the stage. There was maybe 18 months between the opening in Quebec and the opening at the Tarragon. Were you aware of the slot that it was going to go into in that second season, or were you just
No.
no?
I consider ourselves lucky to have a play at all.
Now that's a great question. What did Michel Tremblay think of you translating it? That must have been.
He was very wary,
Hmm.
and at first he was not sure at all. And then he had someone read the translation in Montreal, and she said it was very good. So he said, go ahead, do it.
What a relief.
The
I wonder who that woman was.
Ils ne savaient pas que c'était impossible, alors ils l'ont fait. They didn't know it was impossible, so they did it.
Right. And I remember him coming to Toronto.
Yeah.
I remember him staying at our house, I think,
Mhm.
and seeing the production. I have no idea, no concept of what he thought, but what did he think when he saw it? Do you remember that? Was there outrage or confusion?
No, he was very pleased. It was not Quebec, it was Toronto, different actors. He was very pleased to see his play in another language.
It felt like the guttural, like the spirit of the characters came through very strongly.
Mhm. And that's the whole point. It was the spirit of the characters and the story that was most important, not the language.
Not the language. No, because the storytelling is the story. And speaking of that, there's like the themes in this play are shocking. They're so dark. The sister relationship, even today, I'd say that's quite a rare thing to see on stage, is sisters working out an adult relationship. And the two different perceptions of their parents' marriage, of their own shared childhood past, the revelations about what was really going on in that marriage, and the violence and the exhaustion.
They were so good at escaping.
Yeah, they both had their way of escaping.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Manon and Carmen both have an escape. Yeah. I always imagine a good play causes an argument in the parking lot on the way home. And I kept, as I was listening to this wonderful production, I was imagining the husbands and wives awkwardly sitting next to each other in the audience, 50 years ago, thinking they'd never heard some of this stuff ever said out loud.
The language in the play must have been shocking.
And yet there's also so much vulnerability in some of those soliloquies, those monologues. They really, they're very vulnerable and open themselves up.
I think that Michel is especially laudable for making both of them right.
Making both of them
right.
Yeah.
Making them right.
Yeah, making them right. Yeah, there's no one side or the other. And then you have the daughters campaigning for each as well. And the beauty of also seeing those characters begin to reappear and reappear and reappear all through the plays. Did that impact how you went on to translate the Tremblay plays, knowing these characters more and more?
No. We got to know them like everyone else.
Right.
But we had no idea that they would continue.
No, I bet Michel didn't either.
No.
You just write what you write, and these people are inside him. Yes. And the beautiful reveal of finding out more and more about them as the years go on.
Mm.
How was it carrying on working with Bill after this? Did you then see the next play you wanted to do, or?
I remember that Bill was very worried of David French's next play and David Freeman's. And I had recently read an interview with Joe Papp from the New York Public Theater. And he said that it was so important for a director to do the second play and not stop at the first one.
It's like your second novel. The second play turns you into a playwright. Yes. Yeah. And you need that support from your community. Yeah. And so he felt, even though you say he was wary of their second plays, of The Fields and Battering Ram, he felt he needed to make that commitment. Did he feel the same with Tremblay?
Yep. Although with Tremblay's plays, they got better and better.
Yes, they did. They did.
I remember that the second play we did was Les Belster, which was written before Marty Lou, but it was a wonderful play.
It is magical.
And
to have all of those women on stage was groundbreaking.
Amazing.
Yeah, and to have female stories right down the table, all of them individual, magical.
Michel was always very good about writing for women.
Yes.
Yeah. Writing about women and for women.
And for women.
We saw the Les Belles Sœurs in the Scottish version at Harbourfront. The
Good Sisters.
Amazing. And I know that it was very successful in Japan as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's a human story. But Mary-Lou really introduced Quebec, Montreal, French Montreal, Tremblay to English Canada. And so no matter what was going on in Quebec with Michel Tremblay, we would never have heard about it. We only heard about the next play or his work at all through your translations at the time. So you were really the mouthpiece.
He was completely unknown in English Canada.
The cliche about the two solitudes is true. I mean, the two very, very different worlds that don't interact really, especially in the arts.
And yet through this translation, we see the stories are the stories of the people here, the people there, the people everywhere. Did it, I don't know, I think there's something about this play, if I was to work on it for 6 months and do a translation, that it might get me to reflect on my own life and my own relationships. I'm not saying your marriage.
I hope not.
Anything like this. But certainly I found it very interesting, the relationship of the siblings, and really thinking about what does my sister or my brother remember of my childhood? Did it make you curious about things in your own life?
Sure, it did. I always use my mother for various expressions.
Really?
Yeah. And some of us get out and some of us don't.
Right.
You got out.
I did. Yeah, I got out. I went along my way. Adult life is tough. I can, that you've got Nicolas is all grown up. My kids are all grown up. This being the first translation that you two did together, how do you place it in the sort of canon of the ones that you worked together? Did Did it sort of set the choreography of how you would work together from then on?
Yeah. And first of all, it created a bond between us. And from then on, it was much easier to work together.
And how did you actually do the work? Would you like translate it verbatim and then you would go through it for the dramaturgy? Like, what was your rhythm?
I would translate, and then we would work together to get it right in English.
You would read it aloud, and
Mhm.
then like ping pong, back and forth and back and forth, and oh, that doesn't sound right, and they fine-tuned it until they were both happy with.
Bill was very good about knowing what would work in English.
Right, and in the individual voices of the characters, because they speak very differently, which I
Yep.
really appreciate in the translation. You can really hear the rhythms are different. How did you manage some of those colloquial joual expressions that they must have used in the French?
That wasn't a hard part.
It was or it wasn't?
It was.
Yeah.
I would insist on using colloquial English and getting the characters to speak like lowlifes. And Bill always had a more refined way of speaking English. And I would argue with him about that.
Bill and his erudite, elegant language.
Yep.
You know what? It's interesting. Colloquial English puts you in a location so quickly. So I'm wondering if there was like a colloquial English Montreal expression that you would have relied on versus, say, something somebody might have said in Sudbury or in the East End of Toronto.
I remember that one of the most difficult things for him was the expression, the eyes in the bean grease.
The eyes in the
bean grease.
Oh, yeah, I was reading that going, the eyes in the bean grease. The eyes in the bean grease. Help me.
Les yeux dans la graisse de bean.
So it's a direct, what does it mean?
The eyes in the butter.
The bean grease is the butter?
It means being stuck in your situation or with your.
You're just staring at the butter and not able to move on.
And graisse de bean has a very unpleasant sound to it.
Graisse de bean is very local.
Yeah, it's not butter, it's grease.
It's lard.
Yeah.
It's like after you've cooked the pork and the beans, you've got a kind of congealed grossness there.
Yeah.
And then you can't take your eyes off it.
Yeah.
And you're just focused on the ugly, greasy sides of life. Okay.
And feeling sorry for yourself.
Oh, and you're feeling all sorry for yourself.
Very hard to translate.
Yeah, it is very hard. But I like that it stayed there because it has a feel to it. It's definitely feels kitchen, gross.
Yeah.
That, like you get especially just the word grease. Oleaginous, kind of sticky, smelly thing.
Bad food because that's all you can afford.
Yeah. You know, in the Tadoussac Playwrights Residence, we always end up having discussions about the title. This title is quite close to the original, but it's not exactly the same. Forever Yours, Mary Lou. What, did you have a discussion around the title, or was it just obvious that it must be called this?
It was both. The title comes from the photo.
the photo, which
The
is this thing.
dedication of
The
the photo.
dedication of the photo is forever yours, Mary Lou. À toi pour toujours, ta Mary Lou.
Right. À toi toujours, ta Mary Lou. Right.
Mm.
And how do you remember the origin of the photograph? It's also hanging up still in the Tarragon.
I remember that Michel told me that they were looking for a photo for the production, and one of the actresses had an old photo of her family, including her mother and 3 sisters in the country from the 40s.
Wearing trousers.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That became the photo for the production. And it worked in English as well, obviously.
Yeah. And so it was in the Montreal production?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it is a stunning photo. So I'm curious too, at the end of the play, sometimes you can feel at the end of a play, because the ending is quite wonderful. It's a wonderful last line of a play. I don't want to give it away in case anybody hasn't seen the play yet when they're watching this, but would there sometimes be silence? How would people react to the end?
People were stunned.
Yeah.
Because that is the first time that Mary Lou and Leopold get up.
And that is also fascinating. Are you saying that Mary Lou and Manon and Leopold and Carmen, they never move the whole 90 minutes of the play and until the very end?
Actually, Carmen can move, but Manon sits in her rocking chair.
So Manon is just sitting in the rocking chair. So she's rocking. So there is some movement. And then Mary Lou is knitting, but all she's doing is knitting and staring at the TV.
Yeah.
And Leopold
is sitting in front of all his beers.
But he doesn't drink them?
No.
No, because he's looking at the second round.
The second round where
he can afford it, and
Yeah.
he doesn't have to drink it. He can just trash it. You know,
that wonderful theme of madness, inherited madness, and the mania and the aggression that comes on. The boy being in denial that he is like his family. The children being in denial that they've inherited something from their father. That's terrifying and so visceral.
There is a debate in the play about how crazy he is. Obviously, he upset the table, but he didn't touch Marguerite.
And she keeps saying, "Now you're going to hit me," now, and he never does. Yeah.
No. Does.
And again, you've got this balance, right? You've got he says, she says.
Mm.
Was he really as crazy as they say, or was he just depressed?
I think he's not that crazy yet. It gets worse when he drinks. And if he keeps drinking like his father, then he's really going to be crazy. But he knows that he's heading there.
Which explains the ending.
That was another thing that made us laugh. When Mary Louise describes him with his eyes crossing and his tongue hanging out.
Yeah, his eyes crossing and his tongue hanging out.
I remember Bill saying, "Oh my God, this is terrible," and he laughs.
And would you work together for hours at a time? Would you just get into his office or something and just knuckle down?
We worked for hours and hours in that study. You were sleeping in the room next to us.
Oh, at our house.
Yeah,
Right there.
on Hawthorne.
Oh,
I
amazing.
was there during the day a lot.
Right. My whole childhood.
Yeah.
Known you my whole life, guys. Amazing. And these weird plays are in my DNA. Right? Still give me nightmares.
I
Phenomenal.
remember that it was not long after Benji had died. I remember Bill talking about that.
About Benji?
Yeah, that's when I really started to appreciate Bill.
When he told you that, when he opened up about Benji? What did you think of him before?
I didn't know what to think.
You guys came from sort of similar but different backgrounds. Academically, you were both very academic. You'd done a lot of study
But he was much more accomplished than me.
So it's interesting though, because that dramaturgy, I guess, came out of his academic English background, just a real ear for, I always think with my dad that his gift of music, like the fact that he was he could play anything by ear. He could hear rhythm. He could hear the musicality of speech in a way that's not just like a text-based dramaturgy. He could hear a play.
Yeah.
I remember often sometimes going to the theater and he'd close his eyes. He's listening to the story. Or I don't think he was sleeping. No, he was definitely listening. And that combined with his ability to truly analyze text and have that wide knowledge of literature and history of literature. It's a real gift of for a translator, but for a director.
And it had a big influence on me. Bill taught me to listen.
He taught you to listen. Did he talk about that often? Like, was that something he actually taught you, or did you just pick it up?
I just picked it up. I picked it up from him.
So he would, like Anne just described, he'd want to hear it read aloud over and over until it sounded right. And you knew, okay, you have to put it in your body. You have to speak it out loud.
Yeah.
What was it? I still want to just go back a bit to know, what was it like working with the English Canadian actors on this, in terms of them getting their mouths around these stories? These names are very French Canadian. In the audible version that we just listened to, the audio version with the Montreal actors, I noticed they say Leopold. They mention all the words with a very French accent. I don't think they did that back in the original. I think it sounded more Anglais.
Really?
Yeah. Did they struggle with this in some way, in terms of the fact that this was a French Canadian play?
I don't think they did. I think they understood the story, and the accent had nothing to do with it.
Right.
It is very good with French Canadian actors, but they are not obligatory.
Yeah, I and having seen a few Tremblays when I lived in England, and certainly the Good Sisters, which I saw in Glasgow, I think the one thing that sometimes I thought was confusing in England was people thought this was a class play. So they would really stress the working classness rather than the family.
Yeah.
And so it would have this very heavy cloak of like working class something or other. And I appreciate that about your translation. Is it's not really, it's there, but it's not the main theme. You've really
No.
just kept it very, very
I
clean.
think it is much more about a family than about class.
Yeah.
That is true of all of Michel's plays.
Were there any of his plays that you wish you had translated that you haven't got round to yet, or you never did?
The only one is the play about his mother.
Encore une fois, s'il vous plaît.
Encore une fois, civil play.
Right.
Or what is it in English? Plays.
For the pleasure of seeing
Very
her.
Ah, that's it, for the pleasure of seeing her. The other thing I thought was kind of cool, and tell me if I'm right with this, as I read that Le Petit Bonheur, that you were the artistic director of Théâtre Français in Canada, in Toronto, which was Le Petit Bonheur back then. You would do the French version of the Tremblay when the English version was happening at Tarragon. Would they happen at the same time?
That was later on.
Right. Not for this one. That's like a little quick, right? But after on, you made a point of doing that?
Yeah. I always wanted people to see both. It was a very special.
Yeah. Well, I feel I'm really honored to have actually been able to have this conversation with you. I have such strange little childlike memories of this production, and it's such a great opportunity to visit with my dad in a way and get to know a different side of him, and to revisit that time. The idea that all this was happening in the room next to my bedroom is kind of interesting. And it also gives me an opportunity to think back to some of those, like George Sperdakos, who I just adored as an adult and a child, and Patsy Hamilton, who was so phenomenal in that role, and even the other two, who I remember as a kid, the two sisters. So I just thank you for letting me have this opportunity to think about it.
It was so good to do this with you.
Just before we go, is there anything that you wish that translators should be keeping in mind?
I always maintain that a good story is everything.
It always comes down to a good story. Yeah, that's
and
so true.
People we care about.
Beautiful. Thank you.